conversation about the supporting research with Dr. Mark Schneider, Director of the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education. And we hope that you will also join us again for that conversation, and registration will be posted in the chat. You can find it there. For today's conversation, our plans include first continuing with our welcome, and I will soon turn it over to our moderator, John Gompertz, former president and CEO of America's Promise Alliance. And then we will hear from our 4 thought leaders sharing brief overviews of their proposals, followed by a moderated discussion of those proposals. And then we will hear from our expert commentators about their response to these proposals based on their own on-the-ground experience. And then in the second hour, John will engage all speakers and all of you, all participants, in a moderated discussion before we close out at 5 p.m. Eastern time. And so with the agenda in mind, I'd like to just share a few quick little housekeeping details, as I'm sure you're all experienced with Zoom. First, we'd love if you would introduce yourself. So please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name and city or state and your organization. And then make sure you click that little button that says all panelists and attendees so we can all see it. We will keep all attendees in a listen only mode for the first part of the conversation, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions and comments in the Q&A box. And you may be called on to share your thoughts during the moderated discussion later today. You can also use the hand raise tool on Zoom. This conversation is also being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all who registered. And then also any and all resources that you see shared as links in the chat will also be compiled and shared in a follow-up email. So again, we're really excited to learn from our four thought leaders today who will share their ideas for high dosage tutoring. So we've got Neil Campbell from the Center for American Progress, Vicki Katz from the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University, Susanna Loeb from the Annenberg Institute for School Reform at Brown University, and Bob Slavin from the Center for Research and Reform in Education at Johns Hopkins University. We then have the opportunity to hear from our 4 expert commentators who will respond to the presentations and comment based on their experience, including Corinne Apollon of Apollon and Partners, Monroe Richardson from Reed Charlotte, Nati Rodriguez from Step Up Tutoring in Los Angeles, and Shirley Sagawa, former CEO and co-founder of Service Year Alliance. And so you've got detailed bios of all of these great speakers posted in the chat. You can read more about them. And now I have the great opportunity to turn it over to our esteemed moderator, John Gompertz, who's the former president and CEO of America's Promise Alliance, who's going to launch our discussion and conversation today. So welcome, John.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks to everybody for joining this afternoon. I think we have a terrific group, and I'm really looking forward to both the presentations and the conversation. I'm going to set the table very briefly. I think the group of people who we have assembled here today do not need a lot of table setting, but just quickly, as our incoming president would say, here's the deal. We have a big problem, learning loss. We have a big idea, large-scale tutoring core to help with recovery. We have a big opportunity, a new administration and new Congress who have real concern and a desire to respond. We have a series of proposals that we'll hear about briefly. We have policy experts with us. We have national and local program leaders. And here's our hope for this conversation, that we can find commonality and agreement that folks could take to the incoming administration and to Congress to get action. And again, just to quote the incoming president, in my opinion, this is a big deal. Like, we have the opportunity to really make something significant happen. So thanks to Ralph, to Emily, Yoli, and everyone for bringing us together. Thanks to all of you for joining, and let's go. I'm going to turn it over to Vicki to make the first presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and for joining us this afternoon. I'm an associate professor at the Rutgers School of Communication and Information, as John said, and for over a decade now, I've done research on low-income and immigrant communities, and especially on the kinds of learning that happen with technology across generations in those families. And so what I want to talk to you about today is a proposal for what I'm calling a digital ambassadors learning core. Next slide. So Remote learning, as we know, has been an enormous burden on all parents, but it's been a particularly difficult burden for parents of English language learners for a number of reasons. Some of them being that they themselves are less likely to have a high school diploma, less likely to feel comfortable interacting with English speaking teachers in US schools. And um, in addition to that, they're also less likely to have the adequate internet access and devices to feel confident as internet users. And so they're having an especially difficult time. Nationally, 1 in 3 K-12 students lacked sufficient internet access, devices, or both in the spring. The numbers are even worse for children of immigrants. And already overworked teachers cannot assume these tech support responsibilities, nor will immigrant parents. Many are working multiple jobs and shifts that conflict with school hours. And in many families, it will and has fallen to older children to manage their younger siblings' remote learning alongside their own, since they understand the technology, language, and expectations of schools better than their parents do in many cases. These conditions threaten to cascade educational inequities without an immediate intervention. I know that everyone on this call believes that we are at a particularly good moment to do that. So let me propose the Digital Learning Ambassadors Corps. Next slide, please. My proposal is that we roll this out and can immediately, that such a corps would be staffed by young adults in predominantly immigrant communities. There are millions of young people, like my students at Rutgers University, who are either completing remote undergraduate coursework at home or who graduated this past spring. They're looking for meaningful, paid work. And as tech-savvy native speakers of languages that are spoken by the K-12 students who struggled the most in remote learning this spring, I believe they are our best and currently largely untapped resource for supporting better learning experiences this fall and coming spring. A digital learning ambassador who speaks the family's language and can guide their connections to remote content and to teachers will address the needs of parents and students. But equally important, these ambassadors can provide educators with the critical support they need to manage incredible teaching challenges. Digital learning ambassadors would be hired and have adequate management within the local district, and each would adopt a number of families that the district deems to be manageable, depending on the local context. And the ambassador would be responsible for contacting each family twice a week. They'd be trained to troubleshoot most family technology issues remotely and elevate any issues that require more serious attention to their supervisors. They would also be able to flag content issues for teacher follow-up that parents may not feel comfortable directly addressing with their children's teachers. A digital learning ambassadors corps doesn't need to be expensive, and it has precedent in national policy, going back to the digital literacy corps proposed in the 2010 National Broadband Plan. Cities and regions can get started right away by using expanded allocations of Title I, Youth Employment and National Service Corps funds to hire and train digital learning ambassadors, perhaps starting in the 30 largest and most diverse school districts and drawing from proven and scaled service programs like Success Mentor Corps and City Year. Digital learning ambassadors need not be limited to English learners or to students with special needs, which are the two groups that we know are having the most difficulties learning at home right now, because every class of remote learners could benefit from this kind of assistance. But if we must triage, then our district should place the ambassadors where they can be of most service to our most vulnerable students and their families. And in the longer term, with the benefit of new federal leadership and resolution of the pandemic, the digital learning ambassadors could evolve to be one element of a broader national commitment to ensuring future school disruptions do not deepen educational inequality. This program could also signal an important commitment to an innovative post-pandemic education strategy, that an effective and sustainable digital infrastructure for equitable education will be local, and that it will center the assets that young people can bring to strengthening their own communities. Thanks.
Terrific.
Did
Thank you
I
so
manage
much,
to do that
Vicki.
in under 7 minutes? Because I'd be the first
That was
academic to not go fully to time in the history
that
of the
was
world, I think.
that was well. You should get like tenure and full professorship right now because you did that in such good time. That was just tremendous. Thank you so
good.
much.
Well, thank you.
Neil, I'm gonna turn to you. Vicky set a pretty high bar in content and speed. Let's see what you can do, Neil.
All right, thank you much. If you guys want to free my video, that would be great. It won't let me. Oh, there it goes. All right, thanks so much, everybody. I'm Neil Campbell. Thank you for the invite today. I'm so happy to see all these great ideas getting discussed. I think this is obviously a areas of critical need, and you know, potentially something could happen this winter and spring, but I think we need a lot more mobilization and awareness to really approach the scale of the problem that exists. It is just unbelievably large challenge to reach all the kids that have lost so much this year. So again, I'm Neil Campbell. I work at the Center for American Progress. We are a progressive think tank located in DC, and we kind of sprung into action on a lot of work related to the coronavirus crisis in February and March this year. That started out with you know, kind of advocacy and technical assistance and proposals for you know, emergency federal aid to respond to the crisis and deal with things like the need for meals and digital learning and those kinds of investments. And then over time, you know, in discussions we were having about these challenges, kind of came up with this framework of categorizing the needs that exist and will exist looking forward to hopefully fully recover from this crisis. So I just want to mention this quickly of like that there are distinctions, and they're important to make sure that we get dedicated funding to this. So the first, responding. So the things about meals, tech access, ventilation in schools, so that we're able to reopen and re-engage kids. The second being stabilizing state and local fundings, because we know that you know, what we were providing beforehand is not going to be nearly sufficient, but making it worse as the economic crisis you know, impacts state income taxes and sales taxes and property taxes is going to make all this work exponentially harder if, you know, leaders are having to navigate layoffs and deferrals and all kinds of ugly stuff that might happen. But even if we do those things, we're not going to come close to solving the problems that have been exacerbated during this crisis. And so we need dedicated, substantial, ongoing funding around recovery. And so coming out of the development of that framework and the advocacy we were doing, I worked with a couple of colleagues on this proposal that we're calling the Opportunity and Counseling Core, which would, we didn't put specific dollar amounts, but are hoping that it would be multi-billions of dollars that the federal government could invest to address what we think is really a two-sided need. And I just want to walk through because I think these are all important for building the political case for this. So the first, you know, we're talking today about the kind of lost instructional time and interruptions to learning that millions of kids, and in concentrated ways that amplify all the existing inequities in our systems, the lost learning that has happened. And so we need ways to get support to these kids when they come back to school, to engage them in their learning again. And then the second part is that there is unbelievable trauma that kids have experienced. We know from the last recession that the kind of geographic concentration of job losses had pronounced effects on achievement at localized, you know, the density of job loss that happened in the Great Recession, you know, was followed in subsequent years by concentrations of loss in achievement, and then also in some of the like mental health indicators for teens especially. And so there is going to be, that's going to be amplified dramatically with all that kids and families are going through this year. And so that, you know, led to the kind of the both sides of our proposal. So the Opportunity Core is, we envision being folks that are doing tutoring, that are expansions of teacher residencies, that are, very similar to what Vicki was talking about of other roles in schools, like that digital learning support that it can help families, navigate the technology they need and communicate with them and offer tech support for all those kinds of things that may happen. So that's the opportunity side. And then the counseling side is that we know there's also, it's maybe not as robust and gold standard evidence supporting the importance of school counselors, social workers, and psychologists relative to tutoring. But there is evidence of, that increased access to counselors and social workers has relationships with decreased discipline incidents, higher rates of on-time graduation. And so we think that is just going to be incredibly important, especially for the millions of kids that have had very little formal schooling and educational exposure in recent months. So there's going to be great needs and challenge to connect them with the educational systems before we can even hope that things like tutoring will be as effective as they can be. If the kids are having spotty attendance or not attending at all, then we're not going to be successful in the great need of tutoring. And politically, the second part that I really want to emphasize that I think is so important is there is a massive youth employment crisis going on during this recession. It's about, over the summer, it was about 3.7 million fewer employed 16 to 24-year-olds. The employment ratio to the population dropped by 10 percentage points from July 19 to July 20. And we know from prior recessions that there are really significant long-term damaging impacts of that kind of scarring on labor force participation that can happen when unlucky cohorts of adults graduate into a recession. So this is the time to be thinking big and thinking ambitious and connecting hundreds of thousands, tens into hundreds of thousands of young adults with good jobs in the labor force. So we think that the economic effects as well as the educational effects are going to be extremely concentrated, have been extremely concentrated, particularly in Black, Latinx, Native communities and higher poverty communities as well. And so targeting the tutors and the Opportunity Corps members in the communities that are most affected by COVID, both educationally and economically, we think can have significant benefits to those communities and address like long-term needs for the young adults as well. So we think that's a very important political part of making this case to policymakers in the coming year. So as I mentioned, the Opportunity Corps part of our proposal is, we're envisioning this as sort of as good jobs. We want to have kind of limited but not exclusive use of those funds for functions. We want a big part of it to be tutoring, but don't want to restrict it there because we do think some of the like mentorship and connection and the tech support and the teacher residencies and maybe having young people supporting, teachers and their younger peers are all ways that could bring value and can help engage students in the education system so that investments like tutoring are more likely to succeed. A few things that we would want to be in proposals is that there are preferences for local hiring so that we're keeping jobs in the communities where that they're it's the young adults who are working and supporting their younger peers, that there's training to make sure that there is that it's sort of culturally responsive approach to the pedagogy and training that they receive to support the kids in their communities. We also want to make sure that these are good jobs. We think that there are, we would want there to be a kind of many approaches to, so scaling AmeriCorps grantees, letting districts leverage and expand existing partnerships, or if there's not, a base of nonprofit partners that they could hire folks in-house. But we want to make sure that these are also good jobs, that they are things where, young adults could have benefits, that they can, have a sort of sustaining wage to get their careers off to a good start and build that connection with the labor force. And hopefully many of them will find, the great connection to education as a vocation, in either in the classroom or other roles within the education system. So I might have gone a little long, but I will pause there and look forward to the discussion after we hear from the next couple folks. You're muted, John.
That was great. Thanks so much for that. Really good presentation. So, Susanna, I'm going to call on you now to talk about your thoughts on a National Student Support Accelerator.
Thanks so much. And for all of you, thanks for coming to this and for having me here. I'm learning a lot already, and I'm just so pleased to be here. So this is a project that really aims, we won't provide any kind of tutoring or direct supports, but we aim to make it easier to scale tutoring with quality, because the goal is to equalize access to quality tutoring. If you look across the country, the amount spent by families on tutoring is astronomical, close to $50 billion kind of dollars spent on tutoring. And that, I think, really highlights the inequality in access that we have to it. And what I'll mention here is that I do think that the pandemic has been a disaster, and has created, lots of learning loss and traumatic experiences for students. But the inequality that we see and has been shown so starkly, much of it's been around for a long time and will continue to be, unless we not only do something now, but also use this opportunity where we may be able to get some things going that we couldn't get going before, to really help provide more equal educational opportunities for students and close the gaps in outcomes and academic and employment and social outcomes for students. So you can go to the next slide. So what our vision is in developing this National Student Support Accelerator is that every student in need has access to an effective tutor who champions and ensures their learning and success. And our goal in this is to highlight that having a tutor does help with achievement, but as Neil talked about, it's also about all of the other social emotional outcomes and connections with adults and engagements in school that a one-on-one or a small group relationship between adults and students can give you. Okay. The next one. Okay, so what we're doing is saying, if you look and you're trying to scale, tutoring's amazing, as many of you know, because of all of the interventions out there. It really has some of the most consistent positive effects. And it shows that you can have effects, actually. It's great. It's really great if you get certified teachers to tutor. That said, not the other people, paraprofessionals, other kinds of paid tutors, bring in not exactly the same effect, but can get you pretty close to the same. So it's something that will allow us, or just has the potential to scale. But not all tutoring is good. Some tutoring, for example, I think that if we had tutoring where parents had to go and find the tutor and figure out what their student needs, that we are inevitably going to end up with something that is unequal, because parents have such different resources in order to do those kinds of things. And kids, if it's up to kids, also have those resources. So we want to know, when we're expanding tutoring, how do we expand it? But how do we expand it so it remains high quality and people get it with that we increase equity instead of decreasing equity. And so we've been looking at a lot of the literature and trying to create a framework for really what is high quality tutoring. And we have this framework that I have here, which we've developed. And really what it is to help guide us. Again, we're not doing the tutoring, but we want a language so that people who are doing the tutoring and choosing tutoring can speak to each other in ways that is shared and easy to understand. And so we've divided tutoring by the kind of who they get to be a tutor, who the tutors are, what the instruction is like. Is it intensive? Is it 2 to 3 hours a week, at least 6 to 8 weeks? Or is it something that is just now and then? And then are the materials high quality? Do the tutors have access to the kinds of materials that will help them meet their students' needs? Does data drive instruction? That's the use of data is a third characteristic, because one of the benefits of tutoring is that you can meet the student where they are, and as a result, if you can use data to see, well, you have trouble at this, but not on this, let me focus where you really are, tutoring can be so much more effective. And then this issue of being embedded in schools. And this is both to be connected to the curriculum, but also because, like I was saying, if students have to volunteer in, or if it's at odd times, it's just much more difficult to get students to engage. So we have this, and we've been thinking about tutoring in terms of this kind of tutoring framework. Okay. The next slide, please. So like we've been saying, tutoring is kind of amazing in that it has such high quality research. And it really seems impactful, particularly in the early grades in reading, and then again, when emerging in the later grades in math. But it really hasn't scaled. And so the question of why it hasn't scaled, or it hasn't scaled with quality, is one that we've been really interested in. And certainly there have been attempts, No Child Left Behind is a really good example. I think we can all say that that was not overall successful, though if you actually look at what happened, there are these pockets where it was more organized, more in keeping with that framework that I was telling you about up there, which hopefully that's nothing new. I try to put down what I hear from people who have spent a lot of time on this, that those places really did see positive effects from tutoring. So even in a program like NCLB, you can see that there's got potential. But we've been looking into this, and we have about 9 test case sites in the field where we're trying not to test different kinds of programs, which I think is really important to do, but instead to try to understand implementation problems. And what we found is that because there are no kind of clearly recognized standards of what a good program is, that it's hard for districts to choose what they want. For example, each tutoring program needs to get vetted or to be able to defend their own research, or that each district has a different view of what it is, so the tutoring programs have to adjust differently, and it's just hard to choose quality. So that was one thing. And the second thing, which you probably all have seen, is that districts face challenges in finding funding for tutoring, because tutoring is really cost effective, but it isn't cheap. It produces really big effects, but it also costs a fair amount of money per student to do. And that seems fine. I mean, teaching costs money. You are hiring adults to work with students. That said, to make those kinds of transitions in how districts allocate funds is a heavy lift. And so is the scheduling. So scheduling is really tricky. Because if you want it in the day, you have to figure out how to get it there. In high schools, it's a little easier. In elementary schools, you might need an extended day or to figure some of these other things out. So one of the things that we set out to do with this National Student Support Accelerator is to support districts and tutoring organizations with evidence-based tools and technical assistance to address some of these issues to help them scale with quality. Okay. We can go on to the next one. Okay, so here's the theory of action, is that if what we can do, and again, we're kind of 2 months in, so we can't give you we can't show you evidence of our own success, but the idea is that if we can organize and help organize the field field of tutoring by making sure the kind of summarizing the research efforts and highlighting important questions to ask by building a community of practice, which you already have here, but this would be not only in reading, but in other groups interested in tutoring, and helping to establish standards that were clear so that it was easier to assess quality, that would be very helpful. Then with those, we would develop tools and guidance so that it's easy. For example, we're having tools, and this may seem really trivial, but to help organizations deal with the safety and security concerns. Because putting in a tutoring program right now, as many of you may have run into if you try to scale, involves kind of complex ways of making sure that it's safe. And so we want to have really easy tools for that. We also want complex tools. We want some kind of some training of tutors up there. So you can just pull that down if you want some training in culturally responsive approaches or in early literacy or something like that, something that makes it easy, even for university tutoring organizations to do this thing. So we want tools both for districts or educational institutions and for tutoring organizations. And then we were also hoping to create basically a tutor quality assistance and assessment and improvement system so that organizations can either show that they have evidence of effectiveness, or they can show that they have features of being effective so that districts have easier times choosing from the places that are there. And also new organizations can really think about how to get to the kind of demonstration of effectiveness that they need to really be some of the premier programs. And then finally, we want to engage and activate stakeholders to really demand this, because having the demand come from parents, even though I don't think parents should be expected to have to choose the tutoring for their kids, we want communities to demand tutoring because tutoring is such an important part and the personalization is such an important part for students. And that if we do those things, our hope is that well, really that when tutoring expands, it can expand with quality, and in the end, we can positively affect student learning, and at the same time close achievement gaps, and also contribute to just fuller social emotional well-being of students and their later success. I think that might be all, but the next slide. Yes, that's it. So overall, we're just starting this program. We're in phase 0, which is kind of the development stage, but we have first rounds of tools, which will go up in the beginning of January. And we're mostly, I would love any feedback on what we can do for your organization that would really be helpful, or if your organization has materials that you'd like us to help get out so that a broader audience can use that, we would also love to be helpful with that. So thanks so much for having me again.
Wait, you're not?
Don, we can't hear you for some reason.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes? Yeah, okay. Susanna, thanks so much. And it's lucky for us to be present so near the creation of something that's got such great potential. Really appreciate your comments. And now I'm going to turn it to Bob to bring us home with the Marshall Plan for Education.
Okay. Let's see. I got my video on. Oh, the host has stopped it. All right. Okay. We have been working with at Johns Hopkins for many, many years on various kinds of programs to try to make a difference with in high poverty schools. And going back to 1987, one of the things that we've been working on is tutoring. That was and continues to be a part of our Success for All whole school reform program. Very important part of it because, as everyone has noted, there's nothing as effective as tutoring. Recently, we completed a comprehensive review of programs for struggling readers, and we also did something similar in math. And in both cases, nothing comes remotely close to what the impact of tutoring can be. Not technology, not heavy professional development, all kinds of other things that people have proposed and tried just don't approach the impact of high quality tutoring. So we've been working recently with America Achieves and Jonathan Schnur and his colleagues to create a plan about how you might, in this new administration, how you might do something very large, very fast, and very effective. I think all of these are essential because, as we've all noted, the damage that's been done to children, and particularly to disadvantaged children with the COVID school closures, is just appalling. That there are many, many children who are going to be very far behind. Frankly, before COVID, there were many children who were far behind, and now all of those have, had their problems made significantly worse. So we can't be fooling around. We have to do something very large, very fast, and very effective. So you want to advance the slide, please. Let me get. So our plan is National Tutoring Core. Others have used this too. The idea is to scale up and programs that exist, and to promote the development of new programs and the evaluation of existing programs, to be able to put about 100,000 tutors in the field in September of 2021. This would be in reading and math, grades 1 through 9. And a main goal that we have is to be sure that these programs are proven programs, that they have been evaluated, found to be effective in comparison to control groups, meet a fairly rigorous standard, so that we have good confidence that the tutoring that children are receiving is going to actually make a difference. Next slide, please. We're talking about tutoring programs that could be from 1-to-1 up to 1-to-4, and that they would have had, as I mentioned, would have been evaluated in experiments that were either randomized or carefully matched, and that they had strong impacts on children. At the pace that we have to go, we need to have total confidence that the programs that students are receiving are likely, if well implemented, to make quite a substantial difference. Children do not have time for us to fool around in this particular moment, though we have to get better and better at this over time. But when we start right from the beginning, we've got to be using things that we know will work. Next slide, please. We're talking about a focus primarily on college graduates who may or may not have teaching certificates. Part of the focus here is trying to find kind of a perfect intersection between what the evidence tells us works in terms of tutors, of affordability, and addressing a problem that Neil mentioned quite a lot and that we take also very seriously, that recent college graduates in particular are going to come out into a recession, and based on prior recessions, they're going to be screwed. Let's be honest. They're going to be in very, very great difficulty just getting to the first rung on the employment ladder. And so we see this equally as an employment program, as Neil was saying, and as a service to children who desperately need it. the research finds that college graduate tutors who are very well trained and using well-designed proven programs make just as much of a difference as certified teachers do working as tutors. Actually, in reading, there's no difference. In math, actually, for some reason, they do a little bit better than certified teachers. I can't tell you why. Our proposal is that the tutors would be hired by districts. In other words, that districts and schools, Title I schools, would be receiving money with clear guidelines of what they are expected to do with it to enable them to hire people. They might contract with their local AmeriCorps agencies or other providers of tutoring to work with them in this. But the idea is that that districts, we thought, were the one organization that's in our country that's used to hiring large number of people and managing them. And once again, we don't have time to fool around, that we want to have tutoring services being offered as soon as possible and as effectively as possible. But that these tutors would then be trained and with materials and software and other supports to use proven programs initially. At the same time, there would be a major effort to create more proven programs by doing evaluations of existing programs that are already scaled up and by sponsoring development of new programs, particularly in secondary where the research is particularly lacking. So go ahead, the slide. So I already said grades 1 to 9, Title I schools. In each school, the students who would receive tutoring, of course, would be the lowest achieving students in each grade. So that there would have to be very strong expectations that you're not using tutoring to get kids who are almost passing state tests, over the bar. These should be very low achieving kids, and particularly ones likely to have lost out in the COVID school closures. Next slide. We're thinking of this in two big chunks. From basically now to September of 2021, we're imagining that if we can find the money to do this, that we would be building up the capacity of existing proven programs, that we would be encouraging the other programs that already exist to become evaluated and be ready for evaluation, and for new programs to be developed and piloted and ready for evaluation. Next slide. The hope then is that by September, there would be enough capacity nationally to provide about 100,000 tutors. We figure that they would be able to tutor about 4 million children. 4 million children is a lot of children, but it's only about 10% of all children in grades 1 through 9. So this is a massive job, and doing anything less than that, you can see, is just not going to get to the number of kids who are going to need very effective services. Okay, I think I've covered all this. So next slide. One of the things that is important here, we hope that tutors coming into these schools, they're likely to be, from our own experience with tutoring over many years, they're likely to come from the local area, and they're likely to be a lot more diverse than certified teachers are. And so what we're hoping is that one could look for the best of these tutors and to offer them an accelerated certification program to have a new source of teachers who are more likely to live where they teach already, and to be more diverse. So for example, in Baltimore, we recruit a significant number of tutors. About 80% of the applicants and 80% of the hires are Black, but only 40% of Baltimore teachers are Black. If you were taking the best of these tutors and making it easy for them to become teachers, where they've already showed lots of skill and motivation to in their tutoring work, that could be a way of increasing the diversity of our teaching corps, as well as to increase the number of people who are likely to stay in teaching and make a big difference in their local communities. Next slide, please. So that's basically what we're proposing. The problems, of course, are daunting. We're talking about very rapid scale up, very rapid cycle of development and evaluation. There's a remarkable shortage of proven programs in secondary, although there are many programs that do exist that we hope could become evaluated or further developed. And there's much more available in reading than there is in math, and math is going to be also extremely important. But I think that we have to do what we can do with what we've got now, and then a significant investment in trying to solve this problem using primarily college graduate but not certified tutors is going to be a way to be able to spend money responsibly and make a very big difference in a modest period of time. So next slide, I think.
Fantastic.
So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Fantastic, Bob. Thanks so much. Thanks to Bob, Susanna, Neil, and Vicki all for setting the groundwork for this conversation. So I've had a lot of experience in this space. I ran AmeriCorps for a while. I ran a high quality tutoring program for a while. But if I heard all of what I heard this afternoon, my number one thought about this would be, I need to talk to Shirley Sagawa. And luckily for all of us, we get to do that right now. So Shirley, Sierra, can you take down the slides, and can we see the screens and see Shirley? Shirley, I'd love to get your general reactions. If you have questions for some of our presenters, I'd be happy for that. But your thoughts about what you heard.
Awesome. I'm really honored to be among this group. I've sort of had one foot in education policy and one foot in national service policy for 30 years, and I'm really thrilled to see it come together. There's a little bit of deja vu I have, because one of the first things that happened in AmeriCorps was America Reads. So the Department of Education during the Clinton administration said, wow, let's scale up tutoring and reading to kids. And so they turned to national service as part of the implementation system. And that was way back before we had really good evidence being used to make choices. And yet the legacy of that is that AmeriCorps is 2/3 in education. There's a very large footprint there, more than in any other field. And America's already in programs, either schools or after school programs, serving 12,000 schools, 1 out of every 4 low performing schools, 1 out of every 10 charters. So there's something to build on here. And I want to give a little bit of a commercial for why we should think about AmeriCorps as a critical piece of this, not exclusively, obviously, because what I've heard really loud and clear from all of you is this is a partnership. We've got to have a high quality evidence, I don't even know the right word to use, curriculum or methodology for the tutoring. And it's got to be married to the right source of people who will deliver it with fidelity and with caring, that we can build up a lot of the reading skills, but we have a lot of children who are really hurting, and having another caring adult in their life, we aren't talking about it on this call, but there's a lot of evidence that extra caring adult actually also has really profound implications for a child's trajectory. So I think it's a great marriage. I'd be curious to see what reservations any of you have about national service, because I think I do have a few, but which I'm happy to go into. But the fact that it's largely working through nonprofits, that AmeriCorps since the beginning has required that there be evidence, that there be outcomes stated for both what the service will do for other people, as well as how it will transform the life of the person who serves and help the community and its sort of civic development, all of which means that there's something to build on. A lot of the evidence-based programs that spoke on Tuesday actually run on AmeriCorps. They didn't talk about it as much, but it's actually been probably the biggest source of funding for nonprofits working with education from the federal government. I mean, it's an interesting unstated fact of life here. Recruiting, so some of you talked about how important it was to recruit from the community. I think that's incredibly important. So, and that it pays these extra dividends of both getting more connection between schools and community and demystifying, the school for populations that maybe have a lot of anxiety from their own past experiences with public education. I'd love to hear more about how you guys are thinking about the trajectory, the career trajectory, because that's the other benefit that many of you have touched on, getting people from the community, getting more diverse people into schools as tutors, and then finding a way. I really loved what Bob talked about, the rapid certification opportunities. And in fact, if you look at the teacher preparation programs, the alt prep ones, huge numbers are actually funded by AmeriCorps and are drawing from specific AmeriCorps programs for their source of trainees. So that's another area. I think that there's another opportunity here because AmeriCorps is long overdue for reauthorization. And there's a lot of energy building up in Congress, both to make national service part of the stimulus package and to roll it into a conversation about how to make the program more effective. So one of the reservations I've had is it's very, very low compensated. The living allowances are, set intentionally at the poverty level. They can go up to double. They can go up to twice that amount, but it's a lot of people realize that for people from a low income community, that might not be enough to make it possible for them to do this. So that's being looked at right now. And the other thing I kind of want to hear from folks about is the programs in service, and I've shared a paper about this, are actually doing things they're doing tutoring, but they're also doing other stuff. They're doing college advising. They're doing a lot of the kind of out of school time stuff that more affluent kids get because their parents pay for it, and these kids don't have after school programming, sports and things like that. So there is a whole package there that is interesting. And then the last thing I kind of want to throw out is the thought about can we pursue a place-based approach? So I love the bold vision that you guys have, 100,000, they're going all over the place. And I think that's really what I'd like to see too. Is there a theory though that we think about some place-based structures where we can really demonstrate the power of this quickly? And not just, it's not just one school that gets this and they bring in city year and they have one school that's doing great, but whether there's a way to do some of the, profound repair work that needs to be made available to communities in a self-determined way. What are their priorities? And if learning loss is clearly going to be one of them, and but it might be broader than that, and putting those communities in the driver's seat. I worry about having a federal program that says you must have these evidence-based outcomes and you can only choose these things, and this is the only outcome we care about, when communities might care about a lot of other stuff. And there's just not enough programs in AmeriCorps that are led by people of color, people who have the backgrounds of the people they serve. So throw that out as another thing that I'd love to hear people comment on. And I'll stop here. John, you're on mute.
Fantastic, Shirley. Thank you so much. Vicki, I'm very alert to the fact that you are running another meeting in 5 minutes, and I want to give you another swing at some of the things that Shirley said and some of your colleagues said before you have to leave us.
Thank you, John. That's very kind. What a treat it's been to listen to all of these proposals, but also for how much overlap there is and how much synergy there is between the proposals. I feel like I've learned more than I've contributed in the last hour. Shirley, I fully resonate with you that the local control is so important, and in sitting down to write out the proposal for the digital learning core, that really was my thinking, that this should be something that's governed very much at the local level, with local young people contributing to the schools and communities that they grew up in. And I think especially for the immigrant families that I've worked with for most of my career, that have been primarily Mexican heritage families, that local link is critical to the sense of trust deepening between themselves and their schools. I think that's one of the other potential sort of accruals of benefit from a program that's locally based for families that don't have ties that are as strong to the schools as we would like them to, is that a strong tie to a tutor that is well connected to the teacher could be something that becomes a longer standing link, perhaps, than even the tutoring program itself. I'm so looking forward to thinking about how the not just the convergence amongst these programs, but proposals, but the differences among them could be thought about in a way that packages them together and in something that could be proposed. I think there's so many strengths to what's been proposed here, and as Bob pointed out so well, how urgent and big the need requires very big thinking. So thank you for allowing my, by comparison, relatively modest proposal to be part of this grand thinking.
Well, thanks so much to you. Thanks so much to you for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Sorry that you have to go, and totally
me too,
understand.
but look forward to continuing the conversation. I have a feeling it's not going to fit into just another hour. So thank you, everybody.
I think that's right.
Thanks so much.
Bob, Susanna, Neil, any reactions to what Shirley said? And then just to extend a little bit on what Vicki just said, when we had the session on Tuesday afternoon with some of the high performing tutoring programs, one of the big takeaways from the COVID period was the importance of not just connecting to and through school, but directly to families. And that, just as Vicki mentioned, for some families, school is not actually the world's safest place. People don't feel a high sense of efficacy around schools. And people who have the capacity to connect with kids and with kids' families really also have the possibility of supercharging learning. Who wants to go? Susanna, I see you're on and you're nodding, so why don't you go ahead?
I just have two quick thoughts on this. One is that Shirley, I loved what you said, and it's actually, and Bob, when you were talking about kind of which organizations should scale, I do agree that we want the ones that have been shown to be effective, but I think we have to open it up for organizations that are less well established, because they're more likely to be run by people who are from the communities that we're hoping that this program serves. And so I do hope that there's a way to build the organizations that are there, help them build, so that the folks that are running these programs are representative of the students that we're serving. And I think that's going to be really important to figure out how to build that in. And the second is, I think the reaching families is really tricky, and I agree that we want to reach as many families and the most disconnected families as possible. I do think that often schools serve as a good way of doing that, and if you don't go through schools, you lose more than you gain, but that might not be true in all communities. And so I think we need to think about community organizations and other ways of reaching families if the schools aren't the right way. I just worry that if we allow families to be the ones who need to kind of make the effort to get the tutors in what we're proposing, that we aren't going to be leading to something that is more equitable. And so I think there's a balance there.
Good point. Great. Neil, thoughts in response to Shirley?
Yeah, I think she brought up some great points, and not at all surprising. She was a very wise counsel as we were developing our proposal, and greatly appreciated her wisdom in that. And I do think, that was something we did a significant amount of engagement with grassroots organizations and activists and organizers. And it came out loud and clear about, everyone I talked to had a concern of, folks who serve as, in these kind of tutor or core member roles of it, that they are, aware and that they're part of the community, that they're not, wealthy kids from the suburbs, in kind of the unfair dated, just, perception of like TFA, that they're parachuting into a high needs school. And that the jobs be, compensated at levels that enable folks from the community to, to support themselves and or, contribute to their families' economic circumstances. Just the $18,000 to $20,000 is something that would be very difficult for, to be as accessible for a lot of people to take that role. And so, I think that there's, so when we modeled out, the number of people that could be hired with, each $1 billion, we went with pretty large, average cost numbers, because we thought it was important that it had, health insurance benefits, that there was something that you could, compensate recent college graduates and even maybe, folks that are, a little bit further along in their, in their working life, but have, want to connect with education and support their communities, so that these are, family supporting wages potentially.
Can I just jump in there really quickly, John, to say, I think that this is always the tricky part. So two points I want to make. One is setting the pay or the living allowance and the benefit package. In America, it does have health insurance and childcare benefits and this education award. Setting it at a level that it's not so high that then when you get the next level up job, you're taking a big pay cut. And that's always been a challenge, because we get excited about raising the benefits. And then when I was trying to set up a program in Chicago in a hard hit community, we were cautioned against it. So that's just something to think about. But what I really like what Neil was saying, this could be a transitional employment opportunity for people who are in their, 30s or 40s. You're working in the restaurant business, and there isn't a restaurant business anymore. So we should probably think about that as one of the potential benefits. Now, I'm all for the young people. So that's kind of my whole life, is figuring out how do we make the journey to adulthood more successful. But I do think that there's a real benefit to having somebody who has more experience, who needs to make a career change, who might really be fantastic in this kind of a role, but never kind of went there because maybe they weren't super jazzed about academia or whatever.
Thanks, Shirley. And I just have to, as the former head of Experience Corps, I just have to say, there's an entire cohort of older adults who potentially have a tremendous amount to offer in this space as well. I want to draw in Corinne and Monroe and Nati for their thoughts, and just start to broaden this conversation out. I think I'll turn to you first, Corinne, and then Monroe. I'll come to you next, and then Nati. Just for some quick reflections, ideas, questions, and then we're gonna do our best, as Zoom can allow us, to try to have a regular old conversation among people who are really smart and committed to some sort of similar idea.
Great, thank you very much, John. This was great hearing all this. It's really exciting, as I said, from Tuesday, all the work that's coming together. I think a few points that I want to touch upon and just go a little bit deeper around is this idea of doing the work in a way that it is creating, as Suzanne talked about, the accountability and making sure that we have the best outcomes, as Suzanne mentioned, equalize access to high quality tutoring. That's going to be really critical as we think about how to scale and scale really fast, right? And so what we don't want to do is scale in a way that's going to lose the efficacy and the fidelity of the work that's being done. So I really just want to press upon that. Second thing is around family engagement. I think that is a critical component, family and community engagement. So as we think about building that bridge to what's happening in the school day only has so many hours. right? And as we think about everybody's trying to get in the school day and work with students and to help them, we really have to think about the hours outside of the school day, after school, summer reading, and why it's so critical to think about the adults that interact with that child, the caring adults that somebody mentioned, that have an opportunity to be with students and children. If we learn nothing, what we've learned from this COVID is that when we had to pivot to send children home, parents, educators, communities were not ready to do that. I think, for many reasons, and one being from the very onset, families and communities have not been engaged to be part of the support for students. And so as we're moving forward and really being focused on adding resources, we really ought to be thinking about how to cast a wider net to incorporate and build a bridge from the school to the home and into the communities. Things like partnering with YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, places and spaces where kids will be after school. There's only, again, so many hours in a day. And so while I do support in-school tutoring and in-school mentoring and support for all the reasons that we've outlined, we also have to think about, what's happening. Summer loss is a big piece of that. So we have to find places and spaces and ways to add additional time where a child can interact with a caring adult and prepare families and communities to be able to help and support in that work. And the last thing I want to talk about is, and just to touch upon, is this idea around the funding opportunities and the funding models. Been working with a few organizations as well as foundations and philanthropy to think about the costs of doing this kind of work. It's obvious that it's going to take public-private partnerships to ensure that there's a sufficient investment to support this important intervention. And when we think about AmeriCorps, that's a huge piece of it, but there's so many other operational factors and layers above and beyond that: recruiting, training, doing justice to not just the students that are being tutored, but Shirley, to your point, the members themselves, how are we developing and building opportunities for them to stretch and grow. And so increased funding with AmeriCorps is one piece of it, but then we also need to think about how to leverage the school dollars and the funding available through Title I and Title III and some of the other sources of income, as well as I was involved in a Harvard University Center for Education Policy Research, did a learning around outcomes-based contracting, which speaks to paying for success. And so when we think about accountability and success, and it's not just about the test score, they're talking about social emotional, they're talking about partnership, family engagement, longevity and success. So those are the things that I think, as we think about, I'm excited that we're talking about this, but in the execution and implementation, there's so many more opportunities and priorities that we have to think about as we think about partnering with nonprofit organizations, school districts, and then the broader community as a whole.
Fantastic, Corinne. Couldn't agree more. Monroe, for those of you who don't know, Monroe runs just one of the great community-based reading advocacy and service delivery efforts in the country. So Monroe, you've heard a lot of stuff today. I'm curious how it speaks to you and what your reactions are.
Well, first of all, thanks. Glad to be here. And there are so many great ideas that were shared today. So I'm going to try not to repeat some of the things that folks said, but I kind of have like three chunks of observations. First, I want to come back to what Robert said. I can't agree more that we need to work very large, very fast. It's going to be very effective. We're really big on evidence-based work here in Charlotte, and I can't agree more that we need to use things. I think about this as educational medicine, right? So we need to know, just like the vaccine for our kids, we're not going to give them the vaccine unless we know it works. We need to be using things that are effective. And then if we're going to go to a school district or anyone else and look that superintendent in the eye, we need to have high confidence that what we're saying we're bringing is going to work. The challenge is not all tutoring is equal. Not all kids' issues are equal. And so really thinking carefully about what is it that you have, what do you need, and do we have the right intervention? And the reality is, as Robert and Susanna mentioned, there's huge gaps in our knowledge. There's just lots of things we don't know. So I really found Susanna's ideas around the accelerator and rapidly testing and learning to be really important. But then the second chunk is really, as you think about the work at the local level, that's when you get into what Corinne talked about, the coordination work. And so to Susanna, your question, like, why isn't it scale? Because I think it's hard. I mean, the coordination is just, so really thinking about that. And there's a lot of issues in there that I could go through and I won't. We've done work here on scaling up a really effective evidence-based intervention. It takes a lot of work, right, to make this happen. But that's really where I think the rubber's going to meet the road, is like how you do that. So this takes me to my third chunk. I really think that we need to think about this in terms of, if we can solve the first two, we need like a Defense Production Act for tutoring. And so when I look at what's happening with AmeriCorps, for example, we've got a lot of groups. I went through like big groups, City Year. They're in 21 states, 29 cities. College Advising Corps, 782 high schools, 17 states. Teach for America, 50 regions. Freedom Schools, 97 cities, 881 sites, right? We need to be asking groups that are already out there. They've got people, they've got infrastructure, they can hire people. We need to ask them, like, look, for the next 2 years, this is what we need y'all to do, right? And I know you've got a mission. I know you've done the kind of work you've done, but I think the issues around academics, around social and emotional, around health, all the good issues, we need to bring groups around the table that already are in these cities and have infrastructure. And then the other big one, Shirley, you almost touched on it. I thought you were, and you're going to steal my thunder, federal work study. America Reads has been around since 1997. They have to spend 7% of their federal work study dollars on community service jobs, like tutoring, reading and math tutoring, right? It's everywhere. NYU has the largest America Reads program, and we've investigated this for 2 years. We've tried to work at federal work study. We've hired federal work study students as tutors. You can use 100%, you can pay 100% of their salaries for federal work study. So that's a huge untapped kind of market, and bringing a group like Campus Compact to really help the coordination, but really trying to think, what are the big elephants in our social sector that are touching a lot of cities? How do we get them around the table? How do we infuse them with like the really good evidence base, the best that we have? And then where we have gaps, let's figure that out. And then the other group I would say is the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Over 300 communities. That coordination part is really going to be hard. And so we really need to think about how we leverage our existing infrastructure and dollars so we can do what Robert said, which is go very large, very fast, very effective with things we have high confidence if we're going to meet that September 2021 goal.
Fantastic. That was terrific, Monroe. Thank you for that. I know, Robert, you look like you want to, Robert, do you want to, before we go to Nati, did you have a response to either what Shirley said or any of the things that have come up recently, or you want to just keep going?
Well, I just want to make a distinction that I think may be important, because we're talking about evidence-based, and I think it's, as Monroe says, you know, that you got to start there. On average, tutoring works fantastically, but there are tutoring programs that fail miserably, over and over again. So it is, so to start, I think to start with things that are proven just makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, the people who are going to be the tutors could come from any number of sources, so that they could come from AmeriCorps, they could come from communities and schools, they could come from any of the folks that Monroe was mentioning, and these are people who are excellent at enhancing the potential of people, at bringing in people who are idealistic and want to make a difference. That should be what the focus of the local effort should be, but they don't have to use the tutoring program that they happen to make up if it doesn't have any evidence. They could seek evidence for it if they think it's effective, or they could use something that is proven with the very good people that they recruit, monitor, mentor, and make as effective as they can be.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. Nati from Step Up Tutoring, love to hear your reactions and thoughts to what you've heard so far.
Yes, thank you. That's actually a great transition. With Step Up Tutoring, our goal in the partnership with LAUSD was that we would be the organization that would intake, screen, monitor, train all of the volunteers that LAUSD was flooded with when the pandemic first hit. So we've been really in the weeds trying to figure out how to make this organization scale. And we are in a pilot. And one of the components that we believe will lead to success is the connection between the tutor, the family, and the teacher around the student. So one of the reasons why we're moving slower is because of this teacher engagement component. We want to be in alignment with what's happening in the classroom. We want the families to know that we are a reinforcement of what's happening with the teacher. And our measure of success for now is the engagement, that teachers are satisfied, students are satisfied, and the families are satisfied. Vicki brought up a lot of the tech issues that we've run into that as well. After our first issues, usually getting in connection with the family and getting up and running and scheduling. And then after that, after they're connected, the next thing is tech. And what we know is if they're not able to connect with us successfully, that means they're missing school. And so that's one of the things that we're also trying to figure out how to approach those with the family and the school. And we're often the intermediary that gets the family to the school to do whatever they need to find that support. I'm really excited to hear about these proposals because again, we've been in the weeds and not really seeing what's happening around the country, but I thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about Step Up. And we've received over 800 applications from tutors. About half of our tutors are college age, and about 50% is
John, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. One of the things that comes up for me in listening to Nati and having this conversation is that historically there's been sort of a tension between professional tutors, which is what advantaged parents tend to hire, sort of national service-like tutors, and then volunteer tutors who may be more episodic. What I'm hearing in this conversation is a move towards a professionalizing of tutoring, taking this undertaking more seriously. Let's say, you wouldn't go to a volunteer for to go to your point, Monroe. If you had a serious health problem, you probably wouldn't go to a volunteer to get that fixed. Yet we want to send other people's kids to volunteers. That seems wrong and not responsive. So I'm curious, as we tease this out, whether there's a role for volunteers in this, or actually we need to move towards a more regularized, professionalized approach. As we talk about scaling, I want to draw in Lindsay Dolce from Reading Corps, which started in Minnesota, possibly one of the largest tutoring programs in the national service universe, at least. Also extremely well researched and evidence-based. And Lindsay, you had some comments the other day that were terrific about your experience in scaling, and I think it would be instructive for folks who are thinking about national policy now.
You bet. Hi, John.
Hi, and if you turn on your camera, then everybody can see you too.
Let's see here. You'd think I'd have this figured out by now. It's only been 8 months. Let's see. I see audio settings, but I don't seem to have the ability to turn.
All right.
So maybe I'll just talk.
Just go ahead.
You'll just have to picture
Just
me. I
ahead.
apologize. So it's fun to be among friends. I think as I was listening to all of these proposals, I was sort of sitting here doing a cheat. Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah.
Now I'm back. Hey, now you can see me. How about that? So I was sitting here doing this, I was very excited. And I think many of my colleagues who were on the call Tuesday as well were probably doing the same thing. I think we're all in agreement that there is a lot of room for us to jump in to be a part of this scaling effort. I think for many organizations that exist that have been doing the tutoring side of things, and to Shirley's point, our main driver has been AmeriCorps. It's what has helped us scale and grow significantly. I know that many of you have heard of us before and are familiar, but I think for us, the biggest impact, or the biggest inhibitor, if you will, for scaling has largely been being able to find the resources in each state to cover the total cost of placing trained and coached, well-supported AmeriCorps member in those schools. And to all of your points, I think there are a number of programs, Reading Corps and Math Corps obviously included in that, that have spent a lot of time. I mean, we've been around since 2003 and have spent a lot of time refining, testing, and expanding our model to ensure that as we scale, we maintain the fidelity in the implementation. We ensure that those evidence-based efforts remain effective. And I think truly there have been a lot of folks here talking today about the different models that exist that could definitely fill this space. We internally have already been thinking about, as soon as Dr. Slavin's article came out about the Marshall Plan, we immediately internally had a conversation and started thinking about what internally would we need to do to be ready. And we're doing some of that groundwork now as an organization with a optimistic lens. We regularly do, but I think there are a lot of organizations like us who have the right tools, if you will, to be poised, to be ready to jump in. And I do think it's going to take more than just us. I will quite candidly say that. I think there are a number of really great programs out there, Success for All being another one of them, that can step in and be a part of the solution, because even at scale, right? Even in Minnesota, where we have over 500 sites where we support students, we still aren't reaching every student who needs support. So it's going to take all of us. It's going to take large national programs. It's also going to take programs that are community-based programs, like the program that Monroe leads. It's going to take all of us stepping in this space, but I do think this is the moment, and there is a great opportunity, and I really hope we all seize upon this moment.
To react to some of what you've heard, go ahead.
We missed the first part of what you said, John.
It looked like you were ready, Shirley, to react to some of what you've heard. So I'd be curious to know what you're thinking as you hear all these impulses.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, I think there's been some very, very helpful points about other sources of tutors other than AmeriCorps. So I totally agree with the work study idea, and that's been a sort of very unsung part of a lot of programs. Jumpstart is one of them that really runs on work study as well as AmeriCorps. I think I want to underscore, I don't think we should be, I don't want anyone to think I don't think programs should be evidence-based, but I think we do need the resources, like some of them that were discussed here, that will enable, local organizations that are interested in becoming more evidence-based to climb that ladder. And I don't think that we, the allocation of evaluation tools and training with evidence-based models, et cetera, is not evenly spread across the country and in neighborhoods. And even, also we haven't talked a lot about rural areas, but there are a lot of hurting people in rural areas as well. So the kind of resource that we heard about earlier, that's going to just help tutoring programs figure out how to be better at it and bring more evidence is super needed. I mean, that's one of the reasons I love the programs like Reading Corps that are able to take a national model, and obviously Success for All is core as well, to take it to a lot of places. And we probably just need more investment on that side of it. Everybody likes to fund how many heads can we get for this amount of money, but if you don't pay for the the training and the curriculum and the all of those things that go into the quality, you know, we might as well just be paying for, you know, we might as well be issuing checks. So I think that it is, somebody used the term Defense Production Act for tutoring. I think that was you, Monroe. I think we need that. And it will involve all these pieces. And I love that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading is signing up to help put that together, because it's not going to happen organically. And there's a lot of well-meaning people who have proposed similar things and don't have any idea how it all would fit together.
Thanks, Shirley. Monroe, go ahead. And then Mike English, you're in the on-deck circle. I want to hear what you're thinking. Go ahead, Monroe.
I just wanted to add one thing from the perspective of someone that's worked very closely with a school district. We're here in Charlotte. We have Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, about 150,000 students. And, you know, I've worked with multiple staff in the central office. And, you know, the thing I want to say about the evidence-based angle, it's really about, you know, what Robert said. It's about, we want to have some level of confidence, like this will work. Because the other side of the conversation is with a school district that says, well, we've got these kids in this program, but I don't see any impact, right? Like they have their own, you know, accountability. And we're telling them we should use some of these dollars that maybe could have gone to your program. Like if you're pulling title dollars or state or federal dollars. And so we need to be able to demonstrate to the schools that this is going to work, right? And so at the end of the day, I think it's about having some confidence, because it's going to be hard enough to implement with fidelity, right? So you've got both the intervention fidelity and the implementation fidelity. And those are two sets of like reliability processes you've got to run through. And so if at the core, you've got an intervention where you've got questions about it, and at the end of the day, you've got a district that's going to make a decision about, is this good? Is this not good? Am I seeing impact or not? And so I think at the end of the day, again, like a vaccine, we want to have confidence that it's actually going to help kids, but also to be clear, like what's the edge of our ignorance and what are the areas that we actually need to work on? So middle school, high school, you know, math, like we can be honest about that, but then have a really active agenda about what we need to see. And I think the other side of this is like, for the folks that are developing interventions or what have you, we need to be able to say, this is what we need. So all the folks from the US Department of Ed that are on, like, we need to move to that paradigm instead of, look, we're going to take what you have. This is what we need. It needs to fit in these parameters because this is the time that's available in school. We need to have dosage that looks like this, and that, you know, that we can have people that look like this with certain amount of training and support are able to do it. Right. So I really think, again, back to that Defense Production Act idea, we need to get people to develop rapidly what we need so that we can help kids recover.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Monroe. Mike, I want to come to you. And Neil, I see that you've got your hand up, which I love. And I'm curious also, Susanna, those who drafted proposals are now getting some incoming from people who are in the field doing this. And I'm wondering how you're thinking about and how you're reacting to those inputs. So Mike, and then I'm going to come back to Neil and Susanna.
Okay, thanks, John. I am happy to be here too. Thanks for inviting me. I don't think I'm on video yet, but maybe it'll magically happen like it did with Lindsay. I had just two quick reactions. One being, I'm in Kansas City, by the way, with an organization called Turn the Page KC, which is a third grade reading initiative. One of our, I think, proudest achievements here is bringing the Minnesota Reading Corps to Kansas City. And we worked with a replication partner. And so I think that one of the more clever things that the Reading Corps did early on was to select replication partners. And the one here is the Literacy Lab, which I think has really sped up the scalability of the program. So I wouldn't want to overlook the important role that these replication partners can play in expanding. The other thing I want to mention is there is, oh, there I go. Okay. Here we go. Nice. So in a city where we have a crowded field of AmeriCorps programs, so we have City Year here, we have Teach for America, Reading Corps, there has become a bit of a challenge with competition for AmeriCorps members. And so the point that I think a few people made about coming to a consensus about the prioritization of tutoring for national service, I think is really, really important, because without that, trying to reach the scale we're talking about, I think we might run into some challenges finding enough high quality AmeriCorps members.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Lindsay, let me do a quick go round with our friends who drafted some of these proposals and have some, and Susanna with the backbone idea, and get some reactions to what they're hearing, and then I'll come back around to you, Lindsay. Neil, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just, this conversation is, I'm learning a lot, and it is wonderful to get greater appreciation of the complexity of actually making some of this have a chance of happening. But I also want to, I think all of your voices are going to be so important to like step up a bit to make the case for, the scale challenges that so many of your programs are having are so much about the like scrapping for resources to be able to grow and pay the people that you can recruit. And I think like what's in the, Bob's Marshall Plan idea and what we kind of put together with this Opportunity and Counseling Corps is to really dramatically make the case for huge supplemental resources at the federal level. And so it's really about, we need to build the case of how important and transformative it could be if there are billions put into this, and not like, so it's not scrapping for an allocation of title money. It's not, so I think that there are complex challenges that, if we are fortunate to get, members on the Hill to want to work towards this, of like how the money would flow. You'd have formula allocations of, would it be based on poverty, a la, the title programs, or would it be something about, impact of the disease and in communities? And I think that those will be important things, but then also how it goes, if New York City or Washington DC gets $25 million, like who has what that looks like in terms of who makes the decision about what partnerships happen and all that. So I think that there will be super important ways to talk about things like Susanna's capacity building, but there's also like, I don't want all of us to instantly go down into details when there is huge case making importance of the political need and the need to like get folks in all of your communities that are already bought in to tutoring, to like make the case to to policymakers about just the critical need and how outsized it is, like to really change the sort of order of magnitude of investment in these kind of initiatives. So just wanted to couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. Through this whole conversation, I'm thinking resources. It changes everything. And Monroe's, the thing that's banging around in my head is the Defense Production Act analogy. Like, imagine if we cared about kids who are struggling to learn and to grow up in a healthy way, and whose families are struggling. Imagine if we had a priority on that, like we have had on other things, and all that would flow from that. Susanna.
Oh, so yes, resources. I should probably stop there, but let me give two other things. One, in terms of what Monroe was saying that resonated with me about work study, is just that I do think that universities, and maybe that's because I come from the university world, can be useful here. And it's not just work study, but some kinds of courses as well. Like there's a course, well, in terms of work study, I think there's some places around the country that you might not even think, like Grand Valley in Michigan is doing a whole bunch, and just Stanford that I was talking to is doing a whole bunch. but they're also courses. And some of the courses are things like in the engineering school at NC-A&T in North Carolina, that they've got courses there, and BU also has one that brings in people from who are interested in the math and science, but also are from the community and know, and have gone to some of the schools that they're going into. And so I think universities can play a role, and I think it's useful for them to play a role because it's a source of future teachers that could be more diverse and have these kinds of skills that we've been lacking in the teaching workforce, but also on a larger scale that there's some outcomes for tutors in this as well, where tutors can develop kind of a commitment to their community and have some of these other things that we might really want to propagate in society. So the one thing is that I resonated with was universities. The second thing is that, in this framework that we have, and in part we have this part of it because of talking to Bob, we've got these like very specific things like data use, and then we have this kind of coherence. And I know we have equity, safety, and coherence as kind of the circle around it. And coherence is important, but it's much more than that. And listening to you, I feel like, okay, so really what we have to make sure to somehow get in the rhetoric that when we scale, we also have to scale with a passion, that we also have to kind of not to think about this as applying a formula, that the people who are doing this are committed to it. And so how do we kind of get that in the rhetoric that we're talking about? Because I think it's important on the ground, but I think it's also important for everybody to be thinking of when they're thinking about putting these things in. And I'm not quite sure how to get there, but that's in listening to you, that really made me think that I have to think about this as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Bob? I see you nodding. Go ahead.
Well, on the resources issue really is essential. We also work in England. They're 2 years ahead of us on this. They're doing tutoring right now. They put £1 billion into a program to do this. And so you change that to dollars and change it to our population size. That's like a $7.8 billion program per year. That they've already got running right now. This is, and that's the problem. I think our community of people involved with tutoring are used to trying to make, as we say in Baltimore, trying to make chicken soup out of chicken feathers. We're always trying to scrape and, fight for the little, scrap. This has got to be different, and I think it is going to be different. I think that the new administration is very positive toward this. I mean, every indication we've had is that that's the case. I think the people in general, there's surveys that showing that people are eager for something that's really going to make a big difference in schools in the, as fast as humanly possible. And so we have to start conceptualizing what things will look like when there are resources. But in government, you learn real quickly that lots and lots of resources does not necessarily lead to the kind of change that we should be getting. So I think when we're glad about the resources, we've also got to be holding ourselves accountable to see that we're going to get the result that we know we can get, but we're not going to get if we're not very, very careful and using the resources to activate the people in the communities, the people in the schools, all the wonderful things that are already there, but that couldn't go as far as they wanted to because they were, scraping to get through tomorrow.
Yep, you bet. Lindsay, you have more experience perhaps than many on this call in trying to scale a program, and I know you've learned a lot from that and have a couple thoughts. Go ahead. Go ahead briefly. I just want to make sure that we start to get some other folks involved.
Sure. Just a couple of super quick thoughts that I wanted to share. So, and some of it is responding to things Shirley mentioned, but the first is I do want to emphasize that to what Dr. Slavin said, I think making sure we hold ourselves accountable and that we are delivering results and that we're able to show impact is critical, right? That's got to be a piece of what happens with the funding. The second thing is that we really and truly cannot leave behind our rural communities. A lot of times with these large efforts, what happens is that the population centers receive the resources and we leave people behind. We've been operating our math core in an area called Albany, Georgia for the last 3 years. There was a school when we started that had 6% of fourth graders proficient in math. That should be illegal. 6, singular. We've helped move the needle there, but we're still working and we have work to do. Additionally, I do want to just mention that it's going to take a lot of people, and thinking only about, high school graduates, college graduates, we're not going to have enough people if that's what we rely on solely. I think we as an organization, our split is about a third, a third, a third. A third of our people are recent high school and college graduates. About a third are individuals returning to the workforce, whether that's parents whose kids are in school during the day, who are looking for some way to make a small, amount of money, or they're trying to get back into the workforce. And about a third of our people are retirees. I would not dismiss retirees. I know Experience Corps is out there and does a great job engaging them. But one of the things we found in Stockton, California, as an example, is that our retirees were convinced by the school district there to participate in getting credentialing so they could serve as substitute teachers. There's a shortage of substitute teachers in this country. So you have these people who come into a school, they serve in this capacity, they get this great experience, they get an education award, they become credentialed to be substitute teachers. It creates a pipeline of not only professional career teachers, but also people to support the needs that the school has. So I just think it's really important. I mean, the final thing I'll say is, and Shirley was mentioning this earlier, is we have had an influx this year of individuals who were in the restaurant industry for years, who are serving with us now, who are excited about transitioning into this new career. It's their first entree and they're sort of testing the waters to see, is this something I want to do long term? I think we're bringing a lot of people into this opportunity at this moment. And I do think that there's going to continue to be more individuals who see that opportunity. Not to say our restaurant industry won't come back at some point, but I do think, just as an example, there are a lot of folks who could come into that space. And so thinking about the work study side or the workforce support side of things, I do think that there's really something there, and workforce development, because we haven't really mentioned it, but there is a huge teacher shortage in this country and we continue to hear about it. So whether it's formalizing the teacher pipeline in some way or helping through this process of the year that they serve, getting them credentialed to serve as an early childhood educator or something along those lines, I do think that's another opportunity as a piece of this puzzle that we should be considering. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much. Michelle, from Raising a Reader, I know that you have something you want to lob in here, so go ahead. I will try to unlock your camera if you can't. I think Sierra may be in charge of everybody's life here. You there, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you for adding me in. I added a couple of questions into the box. Is that what you're referencing, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, part of that was underscoring Lindsay's note about the rural community and not leaving rural communities behind. So I appreciate your comments on that. But one of the questions that I had was around some shorter term opportunities. Typically and historically, especially terms of service, they can lead to 9 and 12-month opportunities. And I was just curious if any of the 4 who came up with the proposals had thought about shorter term tutoring opportunities, which would be especially beneficial for organizations like ours that have significant scale across the country in multiple different settings. So just wanted to ask about those terms of service as it or tutoring opportunities and that duration of time for engagement. Thank you.
Great. Thoughts on that from Neil or Susanna, Shirley, if you have thoughts, or Bob, anybody?
I have a question. How short are you talking about?
Well, I know typically we say 9 months to a year, but I was wondering about perhaps a 3-month or a 6-month term. Again, something to take into consideration as we're pivoting through and out of a disaster or crisis, if you will.
Can I add to that by asking a further question, which is the utilization of summer and how we should be thinking about that?
Yeah, I was thinking the 3 months maps very well to summer and the availability of students who need something to do during the summer, and it's a great time for more intensive learning. So that seems logical to me. I don't know, and I would actually ask my colleagues about how important it is to have the sort of consistency of the same tutor over time. You know, if you're using this form of you know, tutor, they're going to turn over every year. Doesn't matter if they turn over in 6 months. So I would be curious what the evidence says, but you could certainly construct something in which that would make sense. I also think there's other roles that we've talked about here other than the actual tutor. You know, it could be somebody who's coordinating volunteers. It could be somebody who's who's working on digital learning that maybe doesn't require that intensive relationship long term. Set up that. I think there's a variety of things that would lend themselves to a shorter term, but curious what the experts really say.
I would jump in to also say, hi, Michelle, how are you? I'll also say, as you think about it, there's going to be a lot of need. So we shouldn't really we should put everything on the table. And I think the point around summer is for those kids that are getting the support throughout the year, summer is still yet another opportunity for summer slide, right? And so when we think about serving all students, there may be scenarios and situations where a child may not, you know, may benefit from a shortened interaction with continued support. And I think the other thing is that as I talked about, not just minimizing this opportunity just, you know, 8 to 3 in the afternoon, but what's happening in after school, what's happening throughout the summer. We really have to open opportunities across the board within the school day, after school, and throughout the summer, because we're falling so far behind. In order to accelerate the support, we need to be touching kids on a regular basis, you know, over the immediate term, anywhere we can, in place and space, as well as time, and expanding that reach.
Corinne, I'm glad you brought that up again, because one of the notes I had was that for very obvious reasons, when we think about policy and we think about national policy, we're inclined to think about schools because they're this big system. As Susanna says, they're this sort of constant intervention point. Yet we know that the Ys and the Boys and Girls Clubs of America and more community-based kind of after school and summer opportunities are maybe more consistent places. They may feel like safer places both for tutors and for families and for kids. And so as we think about rolling this out, I don't think there's any question that it should happen in school, but I also don't think there's any question that it shouldn't be exclusively through the schools. And then I can't remember if it was Bob or Neil who talked about hiring, you know, and it is absolutely true that school districts are really used to hiring lots and lots of people. And that's why those places tend to be very, very unionized and have lots and lots of questions around hiring, and there are implications. Surely, I go back to the very earliest days of national service, and I'm just telling you, you're driving into some complicated territory there. And so how do we, you know, with all the verve that we're talking about, this sort of burst of energy, which I would hope would not be a one-time thing, but like this, a bolus of energy and genius into this that would then continue. How do we do that at scale without running into the concerns of unions? A big question, always for national service and always in the universe of schools. I have a couple of other questions and comments that have come up. Matthew, did you want to weigh in? Are you there, Matthew? Yes, I see you arriving.
Hey,
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for doing this. So my question to you, Bob, well, you sparked it in me, Bob, maybe not to you, anyone can answer. Given the demand is likely to be high and evidence of efficacy for individual models might be spotty at best, I was curious if you thought there might be the potential for identifying some core practices or basic principles that seem associated with efficacy that might be used to help direct investment towards programs that seem promising for scale, but didn't have their own independent evidence that they worked.
Well, I think that the history of that sort of thing is very tragic. To take things that have been proven to be effective and say, well, we did a little bit of this, and a little bit of that, just like they did. And then the results are not what the proven programs got. On the other hand, I think that it's absolutely critical that as part of this tutoring initiative, any tutoring initiative, that you are out looking for programs that are promising and subjecting them to evaluation. The evaluation, has to be, the cost of the evaluation has to be part of the allocation of funds, so that over time you're building up a larger and larger set and more diverse kinds of tutoring providers, where you also have confidence in their effectiveness. I would really hate to get into a situation in which people are just kind of, well, whatever, because they always water it down. Always. They always water it down and make it so that it's not as effective as it was when people were implementing a particular program that had been evaluated carefully.
So I add something to that.
Susanna.
Oh, Shirley, do you want to go first? And then I will.
I'm happy to have you go first. You probably know more about this than I do.
I doubt that. But so Matt, what we were imagining I agree with Bob that we really do want to get evidence, but I also side in the fact that we do see some features that are associated with the programs that are more effective. And what I'd really like to see is something more like a quality assessment and improvement system, where you can get some points for having these kinds of features, and you work towards the place where your features are strong enough, or you've got an argument, a theory of action, even with different approaches that are strong enough, and then you get some RCT evidence, so that that maybe some of the funds come in a way that preferences places that have kind of the best evidence, but also allows places to develop so that in communities that don't have access, because I think, as we know, while there's a potential to scale, it's going to be really hard to do this all by this spring, summer, or even the fall. And so I do think we should try to have this kind of staggered assessment process that culminates in an effectiveness analysis.
And I would just layer on to that, the sort of the Corporation for National Service, now known as AmeriCorps, has a history with the Social Innovation Fund, which is a tiered evidence structure, so that you have programs that are highest levels of evidence get the biggest grants, and down to these programs that are emerging, and they would get a lot of coaching and assistance and access to evaluation and training funding, et cetera. And to me, that's really anything like this. If you want to get there fast, you're going to invest in the proven programs that have big footprints. That's just how you're going to do it. But to stop there is really not doing justice to equity or to the need to scale even beyond that initial investment.
Right. I want to add one piece to that also. I was going to say, as it relates to that topic, equity. So there's some organizations, there's been a lot of talk about licensing. Organizations that are doing great work, have evidence and efficacy, but they just don't have the capacity to go beyond where they are and to go deep. And so creating best practices documented, they're talking about supporting technical assistance, but licensing their programs. And that's a much bigger opportunity with a lot more work, but something to think about, because if we're thinking about doing something really fast and really large, some of the bigger programs or the well-tested programs, validated programs may not be able to be everywhere, especially in those rural areas where the work is really needed. And then also around equity, when the small organizations have the capacity, they may not have the validated resources that they can leverage from a large organization that has fidelity and efficacy that can be used.
Yeah, I just want to lob something in here. I think when we talk about tutoring and programs, it's been my experience, it's easy to talk about this like a transaction. You get this person and you get the kid, and then and then the person helps the kid learn how. It's a relationship. And the relationship is the platform on which the learning happens. And to just, I think we make a mistake, and we sell ourselves short and also create expectations that we can't meet when we just sort of suggest that if we just inject this thing into schools or through after school programs, it's all going to be good. It's complicated. It takes time. The skills that the tutor needs are often human skills. The technical business of the reason that lots of kids are struggling with reading is not a technical reason having to do with learning. It's all kinds of things that are going on in the life of the child and in the mind of the child. And it is oftentimes the relationship that the tutor forges with the child that just unlocks sort of a natural curiosity and ability to learn. So as we think about how this happens, I love the Defense Production Act, but I I wish it were just a little thing that we could go around and deliver to a bunch of kids who are struggling, and then it would all be good. And we all know that that's not the case, and we need to keep it real about what it takes for this to succeed. Monroe, I know you wanted to add something here, and I'm very aware that on the East Coast, it is 4 minutes to 5 on Friday afternoon. It's damn dark in Washington, D.C., and we're going to land this plane in just a moment. Monroe?
Well, I thought all this is really, it's been a really rich and great conversation, and I'm really grateful to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for organizing it, and for everyone that put together the time and effort to put together these great ideas. The thought that's been on my mind for the last several months is looking at what economists and business leaders talk about in terms of a K-shaped recovery for the economy. I'm really worried about a K-shaped recovery for early literacy. And the idea that all kids had a dip back in the spring, but then some recovered more quickly, and then others continued to struggle and decline. And Opportunity Insights, the outfit that Raj Chetty has at Harvard, they showed it literally. There is a K-shaped recovery for math. They've shown it with learn data. There was an article in the Washington Post recently about, I think it was an entire second grade class at a charter school that went behind. So these issues are real, and I'll go back to what Bob said earlier. We got to work. We got to aim large, move fast, and be very effective. Because otherwise, there's just a whole generation of children that are going to feel the pain of this for a long time. So we definitely could go on for this, but I want to thank the campaign for organizing this, and I know for a lot of us, like Mike and I, that are in the trenches doing this in communities, and Lindsay and others, Nadi, that are running tutoring programs, we certainly need the support. And I think the larger framework that Neil talked about and others will be really important to be able to bring the resources, the people, the attention to this important effort. And I'm excited about this, and hope that the campaign will continue to move this conversation forward.
Thanks so much, Monroe. I can't improve on that. That is just right, just the right note for us to close on. I am so thrilled that folks who think about national policy and are willing to make bold proposals have zeroed in on this challenge and this opportunity. I'm so glad that the campaign has linked those who are in the field doing this work with those who are thinking about the policy ideas. I can't underscore more the need to create a demand for this action. I think people want to do something. They don't know exactly what to do, and we have the opportunity to deliver a big idea and then deliver in communities across the country. So I just want to thank everybody who joined us today, those who spoke, those who listened, everybody I think thought a lot. I want to thank Ralph and the campaign for bringing this together. I'm going to turn it back to Emily to close us out, but just a huge appreciation to all involved. And this will most definitely not be the end of this conversation. Thanks.
Yes, thank you to everybody. And I'm not going to take any more of, yes, it is very dark here in Washington, D.C., any more of your time, except to say, please join us again. And this is not the end of the conversation at all for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And we already have something scheduled for next Friday. I posted again the link to register in the chat. We hope you'll be back with us. This will be a shorter conversation, but really good chance to hear about the research coming directly from the Department of Ed and the IES. So please join us again next Friday. Thank you to everybody. Have a great weekend, and we will be in touch for sure. Take care, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you.